The crystalline spires of Veltar Prime crumbled like glass towers in an earthquake. Ambassador Thysis pressed his translucent hands against the command deck's viewing port. Watching another tragedy unfold in the black void of space, the colony ship Harmony's light twisted and screamed as it died, its beautiful luminescent hull cracking apart like a broken mirror. Thousands of his people were aboard that vessel, families fleeing their doomed worlds, children who would never see another sunrise? Oh, no, 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 Theseus whispered, his crystalline body flickering with grief patterns that painted the bridge in sorrowful blues and purples. Each fragment of the destroyed ship caught starlight for a brief moment before spinning away into the endless dark. The enemy moved like a living nightmare through space. The Devourer's swarm writhed and pulsed. Thousands of organic ships that looked like giant insects crossed with deep-sea monsters. Their hulls rippled with muscles and veins, and where they passed, nothing remained.
Ow.
They consumed everything: metal, energy, even the quantum foam of space itself. Commander Vexla, status report, Thysis called out, though he already knew the answer would be bad news. His second-in-command materialized beside him, K-crystalline form crackling with stress patterns. Vexla had served in the Zephyrian Peace Corps for over 2 centuries, but nothing had prepared her for this. They're adapting again, sir. Our plasma cannons hit them with everything we have, but it's like shooting water at a sponge. They just absorb it and get stronger. These watched in horror as another wave of Devourer bioships swept toward their defensive line. The Zephyrian fleet had once been the pride of their civilization, elegant vessels that moved through space like living art. Each ship was grown rather than built, their hulls singing with harmonic frequencies that could heal wounded space-time itself. But beauty meant nothing against pure hunger. Increase plasma output to maximum, Theseus ordered. All ships focus fire on the lead bioform. The fleet's weapons lit up the void with brilliant energy streams. For a moment, Theseus felt hope as the concentrated firepower struck the massive Devourer vessel. The creature's hull bubbled and steamed under the assault. Then, impossibly, the damage began to heal. Worse than that, the bioship's own weapons started glowing with the same energy signature as their plasma cannons. They're copying our weapons, Vexla breathed, her form flickering between fear and disbelief. In real time, they're learning. From every shot we fire, the Devourer ship fired back with their own plasma, but corrupted somehow. Turned into something that ate through Zephyrian shields like acid through silk. 8. 3 more ships died in seconds, their dying screams echoing. Across emergency frequencies, Thysis felt the weight of his species' extinction settling on his shoulders like a mountain. In just 3 cycles, 17 colonies had fallen to this cosmic plague. Veltar Prime, Crystalline Gardens, the Harmony Worlds, all consumed. Each victory made the Devourer stronger, smarter, more terrifyingly efficient.
Ow.
They were like a virus that infected the galaxy itself. His people had evolved on peaceful worlds, where the worst predators were butterfly-like creatures that fed on flower nectar. Zephyrians grew up in crystalline cities that hummed with gentle energy, where conflicts were resolved through meditation and harmonic resonance. They had never known war, never needed to, until now. Sir Vexla's voice cracked with something. Thysis had never heard from her before true desperation. There is one option. We could try contacting the quarantine system. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of failing systems. Every Zephyrian in the fleet knew about Sal-3, the forbidden system where the galaxy's most dangerous species lived. The Deathworlders. You mean the humans? Thysis whispered the word, like a curse. They're trapped behind the galactic blockade for good reason, Vexla said, her form flickering with nervous patterns. The first contact reports describe beings who evolved on a world that's actively trying to kill them. Crushing gravity, toxic atmosphere, radiation that would cook most species. They actually enjoy violence, sir. They wage war for sport. Theseus had read those reports, filed away in classified archives. Humans lived on a planet where the weather could kill, where the ground shook without warning, where liquid fire burst. From the surface, they had evolved predators as pets and considered activities like jumping from high places entertaining. The Galactic Council had quarantined them after determining they were too dangerous for civilized contact. They fight each other constantly, another officer added. Their entire culture is built around conflict. They've never known peace. But they know how to fight, Vexla said quietly. And we're losing this war. Another alarm sounded as 3 more colony ships exploded in brilliant flashes. Dices watched families die, children's lights going out forever, and felt something break inside his crystalline heart. The Zephyrian way of peace and harmony had given them art, music, and beauty beyond imagination. But it had also left them helpless against an enemy that only understood destruction. If we contact them, the Council will exile us, Dices said. Assuming we survive long enough to face trial, Sir Vexla replied, her voice steady, despite the chaos around them. Better exile than extinction. Theses looked out at the dying fleet, at the bioships closing in for another feeding. At the end of everything his people had ever built. Then he looked at the communications console, its crystalline interface waiting for his command. With trembling fingers that sparkled like dying stars, he authorized the transmission toward the distant yellow sun. The message was simple, stripped of all diplomatic protocol, containing only the mathematical proof of their desperate situation and 3 words that his people had never spoken to another species. Help us, please. The signal raced across space, toward the quarantine system, carrying with it the last hope of the Zephyrian collective. In the distance, the Devourer swarm pulsed with satisfied hunger. Already adapting to their next meal, Admiral Kim Dae-ho stood on the bridge of the UES. Vengeance, like a statue carved from steel and determination. The alien transmission played on his screen for what felt like the 1000th time, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something about this message was different. Sure, the mathematical sequences were beautiful in their own way, like looking at perfect snowflakes under a microscope. The stellar coordinates were precise enough to guide a ship across half the galaxy without error. But there was something else buried in those energy patterns, something that made his gut twist with recognition. Fear. Pure, desperate fear. Lieutenant Park So-young, what's your final analysis? Dae-ho called across the bridge to his intelligence. Officer. Park was one of the best codebreakers in the fleet. A woman who could spot patterns in cosmic background radiation that others missed completely. Sir, I've run the transmission through every filter we have, Park replied, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed star charts, energy signatures, and threat assessments. The origin point matches perfectly with our long range. Sensors detecting Devourer swarm activity in the Zephyrian sector. These crystalline beings, they're not just asking for help. They're begging for it. Dae-ho felt his jaw tighten. For 15 years, humanity had watched from behind their quarantine barriers as the galaxy burned. Species after species had fallen to the Devourer plague, while the so-called civilized races debated and formed committees and held peace talks. The cosmic horror didn't negotiate. It just consumed everything in its path like a wildfire made of living flesh and endless hunger. How long have we been tracking this particular swarm? He asked. 8 months, sir, Park answered. They've consumed 17 separate star systems. Each time they feed, they get stronger, faster, more coordinated. It's like they're evolving. In real time. The bridge crew worked quietly around them, but Dae-ho could feel the tension in the air. Everyone knew what the Devourers were capable of. Humanity's deep space monitoring stations had recorded the death screams of entire civilizations. As the bioships swept through populated systems like locusts through a wheat field, Sir, Park continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, the energy signature analysis shows something else. These Zephyrians, they're pacifists. Their weapons are designed for mining operations and asteroid clearing, not warfare. Trying to fight a cosmic nightmare with tools meant for gardening. Dae-ho turned to stare out at the stars through the reinforced viewing ports of his flagship. The UES Vengeance was 1.5 kilometers of human engineering at its finest and most deadly. Her hull was scarred from battles against asteroid pirates, rogue AI fleets, and worse things that lurked in the dark between stars. Every weapon system had been tested in combat. Every armor plate had absorbed enemy fire and asked for more. "The galaxy thinks we're monsters," he said quietly. "It's too violent, too aggressive, too dangerous to be allowed among civilized species. They locked us away like wild animals in a cage." "Maybe they were right about the dangerous part," replied Captain Lee Minho through the comm system from his destroyer Retribution. Lee's ship hung in formation nearby, bristling with railguns, missile pods, and weapons that could crack a moon in half. But they were wrong about why that matters. Deho smiled grimly. Lee Minho had served under him for 7 years, fighting pirates and worse in the outer system. The man had nerves of steel and a tactical mind that could turn a hopeless battle into a victory through sheer stubborn refusal to quit. "All ships, battle stations," Deho commanded. The order rippled through the Third Fleet's 57 warships like electricity through water. Each vessel was a masterpiece of human military engineering. It's built not for exploration or diplomacy, but for one simple purpose: winning wars. The fleet came alive around him. The dreadnought Absolute Zero activated her quantum torpedo bays.
Oh, yeah?
Battlecruiser Iron Will charged her particle beam arrays. Destroyers, frigates, and assault carriers all reported ready for combat. Their crews eager for a fight after months of patrol duty in the outer system. "Sir," called Ensign Choi Hae-won from the communications station. Her young face serious as she relayed messages from Earth Command. "High Command is requesting confirmation of mission parameters. They want to know if we're certain about engaging. The Devourer swarm without official authorization from the Galactic Council." Deho's expression hardened like cooling metal. The Galactic Council had spent decades treating humanity like dangerous children who couldn't be trusted with sharp objects. They'd ignored every offer of assistance, rejected every proposal for cooperation, and built their quarantine walls higher every year. Now, when the galaxy was burning and civilized species were dying by the billions, they still wanted to maintain their precious protocols. "Tell Earth Command that someone asked for help, and we're going to give it to them," Deho replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "We didn't ask permission to protect innocent people when we were fighting pirates in the Sol system. And we're not asking permission now." He paused, looking around at his bridge crew. These were men and women who had volunteered to serve on humanity's most dangerous frontier, who had faced down enemies that would give nightmares to most galactic species. They were the children of a world that had tried to kill them since birth, forged in gravity that would crush most aliens and hardened by a history of endless conflict. "Besides," Deho added with a wolf's grin, "we've been wanting to test our new weapons systems against something more challenging than target drones." The fleet's navigation systems calculated jump coordinates while fusion reactors ramped up to maximum output. In the engineering decks, human technicians made final adjustments to weapons that the galaxy had never seen in action. Railguns that could punch through a battleship's armor at light speed, nuclear warheads that burned hotter than small stars, kinetic kill vehicles that could shatter asteroids with pure momentum. "All ships report ready for maximum jump," announced the fleet's navigation officer. "Course laid in for the Zephyrian system." Deho took one last look at the alien distress signal, at the mathematical proof of a species facing extinction. Then he looked out at his fleet, at the most powerful military force humanity had ever assembled, ready to cross half the galaxy to fight an enemy that had never faced anything like them. "Execute jump," he commanded.
Let's go show the galaxy what
Deathworlders do when someone needs saving. Space twisted around the Third Fleet as 57 human warships tore through the fabric of reality itself, outracing toward a distant star where crystalline beings waited for salvation or death. Behind them, Earth's defensive perimeter stood, empty for the first time in decades. Humanity's guardians leaving their posts to answer a cry for help from strangers, who had never shown them kindness. The galaxy was about to discover that the monsters they had quarantined were nothing compared to the monsters they were about to unleash on their enemies. The human fleet tore through hyperspace and exploded, back into normal reality like a thunderclap that shook the very fabric of space itself. The dimensional rift they created burned bright blue for several seconds before collapsing, leaving behind something that made Ambassador this question. Everything he thought he knew about the quarantine species, this had been expecting maybe. 3 or 4 primitive ships, crude vessels cobbled together from salvaged parts in desperation. Perhaps a small escort flotilla offering whatever meager assistance they could spare. What his sensors detected instead made his crystalline form flicker with patterns of pure shock and growing terror. 50-7 warships hung in the void before him, each one radiating enough raw energy to power one of the smaller Zephyrian colony worlds for an entire cycle. These weren't the primitive craft he'd imagined. These were instruments of war so advanced that his ship's computers couldn't even properly classify half the weapon signatures they were detecting. The lead vessel dominated the formation like a predator surrounded by its pack. The UES Vengeance stretched over a kilometer from bow to stern, a wedge-shaped mountain of armored death that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its black hull was scarred with the marks of 100 battles, and weapon ports dotted its surface like the eyes of some deep space nightmare. Energy readings from the ship's fusion reactors showed power output levels that would have been considered impossible by Zephyrian engineers. "Great crystalline ancestors," whispered Commander Vexla as she studied the sensor readings. "Sir, that single ship could destroy our entire remaining fleet without breaking formation." As Tice's diplomatic vessel approached the human flagship, he found himself wondering if his people had just traded one form of extinction for another. Had they escaped the mindless hunger of the Devourers only to face the calculated violence of the galaxy's most feared species? The docking bay of the Vengeance was vast enough to hold his entire ship, with room to spare for a dozen more. Automated systems guided his vessel to a berth with mechanical precision that spoke of countless similar operations. As Thysis stepped through the airlock, the first thing that struck him was the gravity. The artificial gravity field was crushing by Zephyrian standards, but the human crew moved through it like they were walking on air. Admiral Kim Daeho stood waiting in the conference room. Nevisis felt his crystalline structure vibrate with involuntary fear patterns. The human was built like the hull of his warship, broad and solid and radiating quiet menace. His dark eyes held the cold intelligence of a natural predator, and when he moved, it was with the fluid grace of someone who had trained their entire life for violence. "Welcome aboard the Vengeance, Ambassador," Daeho said, through the translation algorithms that had taken nearly an hour to establish basic communication protocols. "I understand your people are in trouble," Thesis tried to compose himself. But his translucent form kept flickering with nervous patterns that painted the room in shifting colors. "Admiral, I must ask, your homeworld. The reports say you evolved under 1.2 standard gravities?" Daeho nodded calmly. "Earth standard is actually considered light gravity by our training protocols. Most of our personnel train at 3G to build endurance. During combat operations, we routinely pull 12G acceleration. For extended periods, the translation system struggled to process Tice's response as his crystalline structure nearly shattered from pure shock. 12 gravities would instantly crush any Zephyrian into powder. His people required life support systems just to survive. In anything over to G, and even that was considered extreme emergency conditions, your crew Dias managed to stammer, they're not wearing any protective equipment. "How do they survive these conditions?" "We're built for it," Daeho replied with what might have been amusement. "Earth taught us to be tough, or we died. Simple as that." Before Thesis could fully process this information, another human entered the conference room. Captain Lee Minho looked like he'd been carved from the same unyielding material as his admiral. But where Daeho was controlled calculation, Lee radiated barely contained eagerness for battle. "Admiral, the crew's getting anxious," Lee reported. "Word spread through the fleet about what we're facing. They're ready to show these Devourers what happens when they mess with innocent people." Nissus felt his fear patterns shift to confusion. "You're eager to fight them. The Devourers have consumed 17 star systems. They adapt to any weapon, learn from every attack. They're the most terrifying force the galaxy has ever seen." "They haven't met us yet," Lee replied with a grin that made Tice's crystalline structure ring like struck glass. Ambassador Daeho said, his voice taking on the tone of someone shifting from diplomacy to warfare. "Tell us about these Devourers. Show us what we're dealing with." The holographic tactical display materialized in the center of the conference room, showing real-time sensor data from the Zephyrian fleet's reconnaissance drones. What appeared made even the hardened human officers pause for a moment. The Devourer swarm moved through space like a living cancer. Thousands of bioships writhed and pulsed with organic motion, their hulls rippling with muscles and neural networks. Some were the size of frigates, others dwarfed battleships. They moved in perfect coordination, like cells in a vast organism, consuming everything in their path and growing stronger with each meal. They're beautiful in a horrible way, Lieutenant Park So-young observed from her position at the tactical station. Her sensors were painting the room with data streams that would have overwhelmed most species' processing capacity. Sir, I'm detecting massive bioelectric activity. These things aren't just ships, they're actual living creatures, and they're definitely hungry. The display zoomed in on one of the larger bioforms as it engulfed a Zephyrian mining station. The structure, which had taken decades to build and housed thousands of workers, disappeared into the creature's maw in seconds. The bioship visibly grew larger as it fed, its hull expanding and new weapon organs sprouting from its surface. They learn from everything they consume, Thysis explained, his form flickering with grief patterns. Each ship they destroy, each world they devour, makes them smarter and more dangerous. They've adapted to every weapon the galaxy has used against them. Captain Lee studied the tactical display with the analytical eye of a career warrior. Impressive. They're like a living weapon system that upgrades itself with every battle. Park reported her instruments detecting energy signatures that defied classification. I'm reading some kind of collective intelligence network. These bioships are sharing information instantaneously across the entire swarm. When one learns something, they all learn it. Deho watched the display with the cold assessment of humanity's apex predator studying new prey. The Devourers were unlike anything in humanity's database of threats, but that didn't concern him. Humans had built their entire civilization around facing the unknown and making it submit. How many ships in the swarm? He asked. Current count shows approximately 8,000 bioforms of various sizes, Thesis replied. Our largest fleet engagement involved 300 of our most advanced warships. They were consumed in less than 6 hours. 8,000 Deho mused, as if considering whether to order lunch for a small group. That's a respectable target. Captain Lee signaled the fleet. All ships assume combat formation, Delta 7. We're going to demonstrate why the galaxy quarantined us. Sir, Dizis said, his desperation bleeding through the translation system, you don't understand. These creatures have faced the combined might of 17 different species. They've learned to counter every known weapon system, every tactical doctrine.
What can you possibly do that hasn't been tried?
Deho smiled, and for the first time since entering the human ship, Thysis understood why the galaxy feared these Deathworlders. It wasn't just their physical capabilities or their advanced technology. It was the absolute confidence of a species that had never met a problem they couldn't solve through superior firepower. Ambassador Deho said, his voice carrying the certainty of a man who had never lost a battle. We're very good at killing things that need killing. The battle clock on the UES Vengeance showed 800 ship time when Admiral Deho gave the order that would haunt Zephyrian military doctrine for generations to come. Instead of adopting the standard galactic engagement protocol of maintaining safe firing distances and conducting careful, measured attacks, the entire human fleet did something that defied every rule of civilized warfare. They charged. 57. Human warships accelerated directly toward the Devourer swarm at crushing velocities that would turn most organic beings into liquid paste. The acceleration readings climbing on Ambassador Tice's instruments made his crystalline form flicker with patterns of pure disbelief. 15 gravities in climbing, Commander Vexla whispered from her position on the Zephyrian command ship. They're pulling 15 gravities of acceleration, and their crews are still functioning normally. This is impossible. On the bridge of the Vengeance, Admiral Deho stood perfectly still as reality seemed to blur around them. The inertial dampeners groaned under the strain, but they held around him. His crew worked their stations with the calm efficiency of people who had trained their entire lives for exactly this kind of insanity. Sir, the Devourers are responding to our approach, reported Lieutenant Park So-young. her voice steady despite the crushing forces trying to pin her to her chair. Bioforms are moving to intercept. They're forming a defensive wall. Deho watched the tactical display with predatory satisfaction. The Devourer swarm was reacting exactly as he'd hoped, clustering together to present a unified front against what they assumed would be a conventional attack. They had no idea what was coming. All ships, weapons free, he commanded. Railgun batteries, target the larger bioforms. Missile pods, deploy hunter-killer packages. Let's show them what human engineering can do. The space around the Devourer. Swarm exploded into nuclear fire and kinetic thunder. Human weapon systems opened up with a fury that had never been witnessed in galactic warfare. These weren't the elegant energy weapons favored by civilized species, weapons that could be adapted to and learned from. These were crude, brutal instruments of destruction that relied on the most basic principles of physics. Tungsten rods the size of telephone poles, shot from magnetic railguns at significant fractions of light speed. Each projectile carried enough kinetic energy to punch through a small moon, and when they struck the bio-armor of the Devourer ships, the results were catastrophic. The living holes that had shrugged off energy weapons like gentle rain simply exploded into clouds of organic debris. Nuclear warheads followed in carefully timed waves, each one burning hotter than the core of a star. The detonations overlapped, in perfect synchronization, creating zones of destruction where nothing could survive. The Devourers found themselves facing weapons that didn't care about adaptation or learning. You couldn't evolve resistance to having your atoms split apart, but the cosmic plague was nothing if not resourceful. Even as hundreds of bioships died in the initial assault, the survivors began to adapt. Their hulls grew thicker, developing angular surfaces designed to deflect kinetic impacts. Some of the larger forms began spinning, using centrifugal force to disperse the energy of incoming projectiles. They're learning, Thises observed from his position aboard the human flagship. Even your weapons, they're starting to adapt. Admiral Deho smiled with the confidence of a man who had planned for exactly this contingency. Captain Lee deployed the special package? On the destroyer Retribution, Captain Lee Minho grinned as he received the order he'd been waiting for. His ship had been modified specifically for this type of operation, equipped with weapon systems that most civilized species would consider absolutely insane. "Drop pods away," he announced with grim satisfaction. The belly of the Retribution opened like the maw of some mechanical beast, disgorging dozens of armored capsules that shot toward the Devourer bioships like bullets fired from the barrel of a cosmic rifle. Each pod contained a squad of human marines in full combat armor, warriors who had trained their entire careers for the most dangerous mission imaginable, boarding enemy vessels in the vacuum of space. Ambassador these watched in horror as the drop pods punched through the hulls of bioships that were still very much alive and very much hostile. "This is madness," he whispered. No species attempts boarding actions in hard vacuum. Conditions would kill anyone in seconds. Anyone but humans. Admiral Deho replied calmly. Sergeant Im Da-yoon felt the familiar rush of combat adrenaline. As her drop pod tore through the hull of a bioship the size of a cruiser, the living vessel screamed as the armored capsule punched through its organic armor. Alarms that weren't quite sounds echoing through the writhing corridors. Her squad's powered armor automatically adjusted to the hostile environment, sealing them in their own personal life support systems. "Alpha Squad, sound off," she commanded as her marines deployed from the breached pod. "Corporal Yoon Tae-ha-yoon, ready for action?" came the first reply. Yoon was her demolitions expert, a man who could find the structural weakness in anything from a space station to a living mountain. Private Kim Jae-sung, systems nominal, reported. Her heavy weapons specialist? Kim carried enough firepower to level a city block, all packed into a suit of armor that let him move like a dancer. Private Han Sujin, sensors active, called out her tech specialist. Han could hack any computer system in the galaxy, assuming it was actually a computer and not a living nervous system. The corridor around them pulsed with organic life. Walls that breathed and floors that tried to grab their boots. Veins ran along the ceiling, casting everything in a sickly green glow. The air itself seemed hostile, thick with spores and chemicals that would have killed unprotected humans in seconds. Contact front, Dai-Yong called out as writhing emerged from the walls like living nightmares. The creatures looked like a cross between giant spiders and deep-sea squids, their bodies covered in natural armor that gleamed with metallic sheen. Her squad opened fire with weapons that the Galactic Council had classified as primitive and barbaric. Chemical propellants combined with electromagnetic acceleration to send projectiles downrange at velocities that turned the bioforms into clouds of organic vapor. The creatures tried to adapt growing thicker armor and redundant organs, but human weapons fired too fast and hit too hard for evolution to keep up. Ma'am, Corporal Yoon reported as they fought their way deeper into the bioship's nervous system. I'm picking up massive energy signatures ahead. Looks like some kind of central coordination node. If we can take it out, this whole ship might stop functioning. Dai-Yong primed a thermobaric charge, a weapon that would consume all the oxygen in a large area while Dai-Yong dazed, simultaneously creating a pressure wave that could pulverize concrete. Then let's give it something to think about. Throughout the battle space, similar scenes played out on dozens of bioships. Human marines moved through environments that would instantly kill most galactic species, fighting creatures that had consumed entire star systems and winning. They deployed weapons that poisoned, burned, irradiated, and simply obliterated their targets. Where other species had tried to match the Devourer's adaptability, humans simply brought so much overwhelming force that adaptation became irrelevant. The cosmic plague found itself facing an enemy unlike anything in its evolutionary experience. These weren't civilized beings who fought with restraint and followed protocols. These were predators who had evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day. They had brought that lethal creativity to the stars. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the Devourer swarm began to retreat. The bioships that could still move started pulling back from the human fleet, their collective intelligence recognizing that it had encountered something more dangerous than itself. The hunters had become the hunted. 72 hours after the first human railgun had fired its deadly cargo, the last Devourer bioform exploded in a brilliant flash of nuclear fire that lit up the void like a newborn star. The cosmic plague that had terrorized the galaxy for cycles, consuming 17 entire star systems and billions of lives, was nothing more than scattered organic debris drifting through space like cosmic dust. Ambassador This is floated in the massive docking bay of the UES Vengeance, its crystalline form shifting through colors that had no names in any galactic language. These were emotions beyond his species' experience, feelings so intense that his translucent body couldn't process them properly. Relief, gratitude, awe, and something else that might have been hope all swirled together in patterns of light that painted the hangar walls in shifting rainbows around him. Human Marines were returning from their boarding missions aboard the bioships. Their powered armor was scarred and pitted by bioacid that could eat through battleship hulls, scorched by radiation levels that would have cooked most species down to their DNA, and scratched by claws that could rend metal like paper. But the warriors inside moved with the casual confidence of people returning from a routine training exercise. Sergeant Im Dai-Yoon stepped out of her battered armor, her face streaked with sweat but her eyes bright with the satisfaction of a job well done. She'd led 3 separate boarding actions against bioships the size of small cities, fighting through living corridors filled with nightmares that defied description. To her, it had been just another day at the office. Sergeant Admiral Daeho called out as he approached the landing area. Casualty report? 17 wounded, sir? Nokia Daeong replied with military precision. The bioforms were tough, but nothing we couldn't handle. Corporal Yoon sends his compliments on the new thermobaric charges, says they work beautifully against organic targets. Dissis listened to this exchange with growing amazement. 17 wounded out of hundreds of Marines who had voluntarily entered the most hostile environment imaginable. In Zephyrian military doctrine, boarding actions were considered suicide missions that were only attempted in the most desperate circumstances. These humans had done it repeatedly, successfully, and with fewer casualties than a typical training accident. Admiral Vizis said, his voice carrying harmonics of confusion that the translation system struggled to process. "I don't understand your species. The Galactic Council quarantined you for being too violent, too dangerous to interact with civilized worlds, but when we called for help, you came. You risked everything to save people you'd never met. Why?" Deho removed his command helmet, revealing features that had been hardened by years of fighting in the void between stars. His dark eyes held depths that spoke of battles won and comrades lost, of decisions that had saved lives and choices that had cost them. But there was also something else there, something that Dissus was beginning to recognize as the defining characteristic of humanity: compassion wrapped in steel. "Because someone asked for help and we could provide it," Deho said simply. "People might think we're monsters, Ambassador. Hell, maybe we are. But we don't abandon innocent beings to real monsters." Captain Lee Minho approached, his destroyer's crew already working to repair damage from ramming actions that had torn through bioships like a sword through flesh. His ship bore scars that would have sent most vessels to the scrapyard, but the Retribution was still operational and ready for the next fight. "Admiral, long-range sensors are picking up something interesting," Lee reported. "Looks like we've got spectators." On the main display, sensor contacts appeared at the edge of the system. Ships from a dozen different species had arrived to witness the aftermath of the battle. Elegant Altarian cruisers with their characteristic flowing lines, massive Corvon dreadnoughts that looked like flying fortresses, even a few ethereal research vessels, their gossamer hulls barely visible against the stars. "They came to watch us fail," Desus said quietly. "The galaxy expected the Deathworlders to be consumed just like everyone else. Instead, they got to watch us succeed," Deho replied. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." Lieutenant Park So-young looked up from her communications station, her instruments crackling with incoming transmissions from across the galaxy. "Sir, we're receiving emergency broadcasts from 17 different star systems, multiple species reporting devourer swarm attacks. It looks like this wasn't the only plague out there." The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. Bioform swarm they'd just destroyed was only one tendril of a much larger organism. Across the galaxy, other civilizations were facing the same cosmic horror that had nearly driven the Zephyrians to extinction. Deho looked out at the stars. Through the reinforced viewing ports of his flagship, each point of light potentially harbored civilizations that had spent decades treating humanity like dangerous animals that needed to be caged. They had built walls to keep the Deathworlders contained, passed laws to prevent contact, and convinced themselves that they were protecting the galaxy from human violence. Now those same civilizations were crying out for help from the monsters they had created. "Signal the fleet," Deho commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had never lost a battle and never abandoned a mission. "Plot jump coordinates for all 17 distress signals. We have work to do." "Sir," Park said, her young face serious as she processed the tactical implications. "That's going to spread us pretty thin. We'll be operating without support, potentially facing multiple swarms simultaneously, and we'll have to make each shot count." Captain Lee replied with a grin that promised violence to humanity's enemies. The Third Fleet began preparations for multiple simultaneous jumps, their crews working with the efficient precision of people who had trained their entire lives for exactly this scenario. Supply ships loaded, ammunition and fuel. Medical bays prepared for casualties. Engineering teams conducted final systems checks on weapons that the galaxy had never seen in action as the human warships prepared to depart. Ambassador Thies made a decision that would change galactic history. He activated his ship's quantum communicator and opened a channel directly to the Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime. "This is Ambassador the Cyphrian Collective," he began, his crystalline form blazing with patterns of absolute certainty. "I am transmitting a full tactical analysis of the human military response to the Devourer threat. The Council needs to see this immediately." The data package included sensor recordings of human ships pulling acceleration that would liquefy most species, weapons that could crack planets, and warriors who fought in conditions that would instantly kill any other known life form. It showed Marines boarding living nightmare ships and emerging victorious, It documented the complete destruction of a cosmic plague that had consumed 17 star systems. Most importantly, it showed humans doing all of this not for conquest or glory, but simply because someone had asked for help. 6 months later, Ambassador Thesis stood before the assembled Galactic Council in the Great Chamber on Nexus Prime. Representatives from 300 species filled the crystalline amphitheater, their various forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity. Chamber that had once voted to quarantine humanity now waited to hear his words. Honored representatives, the Z's began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. We were wrong about humanity. Yes, they are violent. Yes, they are dangerous. But they are also the only species that answered our call for help when we faced extinction. The chamber buzzed with translation algorithms as his words were rendered into hundreds of different languages and communication methods. Some representatives shifted uncomfortably, remembering their own votes to maintain the quarantine. Others leaned forward with interest, having heard rumors of human military actions across the galaxy. In the past 6 months, Thesis continued. Human fleets have responded to distress calls from 43 different star systems. They have destroyed 7 separate devourer swarms, saved billions of lives, and asked for nothing in return. Perhaps the greatest protectors in the galaxy are the ones we feared most. The vote to lift humanity's quarantine was unanimous. For the first time in galactic history, every single representative agreed on a course of action. As the session ended and representatives began to disperse, Thesis received a message from the Sol system. Admiral Deho's face appeared on his personal communicator, looking tired but satisfied. Ambassador, the human commander said, we just received word about the council vote. Wanted to thank you for speaking on our behalf. Admiral Thesis replied, his form glowing with patterns of deep respect. It was the least I could do. When will humanity begin establishing diplomatic missions in Galactic Council space? Deho smiled. But it was the expression of a man who understood his people's true nature. We appreciate the gesture, Ambassador, but we'll stick to what we do best. When someone needs help, they know where to find us. The transmission ended, leaving Thesis alone with his thoughts. In the distance, other council representatives were already drafting proposals for human military assistance, defensive treaties, and technological exchanges. But somehow, he suspected that Admiral Deho had been right. Humanity would remain humanity, ready to help those in need, regardless of politics or recognition. The Deathworlders had become the galaxy's guardians, and they were exactly as dangerous as everyone had feared. The only difference was that now, the galaxy understood who that danger was really meant for. The end.